The Port of Los Angeles, which is the busiest in the U.S., is seeing significantly less cargo and containers this month.
May overall has been a pretty light month, bookended by very low first week in volume, down more than 30%, as you mentioned. And here we are in the last week of the month, also down about 30% compared to the same time last year.
That chaos and confusion comes at a price, not just for investors or business owners, but for factory workers, for truck drivers, for restaurant owners, for the common normal people who make our world go round.
Dock workers on occasional shifts have been down as much as 40%. Less cargo means fewer jobs. Truckers hauling fewer containers across the Southern California gateway. And realistically, that's going to hit home. If you're getting less hours on the job and you go to the market, the prices are higher, you get hit twice.
Our ports are emptying all across the country. The U.S. economy is in big trouble. Imports are collapsing by record amounts. Trade is grinding to a halt. Import data, manufacturing indicators, GDP growth figures have all turned negative. America is doing very poorly right now. We're going to show you the real numbers, and I'm afraid the picture is not pretty. It seems like the American economy is giving up, and that's because we're losing this trade war with ourselves. After all the big talk about America first and bringing manufacturing back, our economy is willing to crash instead. The U.S. just announced that GDP contracted by 0.3% in the first quarter, and the reason behind America's economic surrender is simple. The U.S. economy is crashing, and it's crashing fast. In fact, things have gotten so bad that professional forecasters announced they're slashing growth projections for the entire year. So you guys tell me, do you know of any economy in the world that can survive when imports collapse by 19.8% in a single month? I don't think so. The data is becoming so bad that even Goldman Sachs had to admit there's a 35% chance of recession. American technocrats understand that we can use underlying data to see through optimistic headlines about so-called soft landings and resilient consumers. We're seeing massive evidence that suggests claims of economic strength can't be true. The U.S. economy is actually contracting. We saw that from the GDP data for quarter one. We also saw it in import numbers for April, which clearly showed trade activity in complete freefall. Well, first of all, there are factory closures happening across America. We can't absorb the massive cost increases from tariffs because Trump's policies are keeping consumer spending depressed nationwide. These consumer-dependent businesses, especially those in retail and manufacturing sectors, have been struggling for months now. They certainly are at a point where they can't continue. This is weakening the entire economic foundation. Remember, consumer spending makes up 68% of GDP. And when Americans pull back because of higher prices, the whole economy suffers. The United States is not the all-powerful economic engine that it was pre-2025. As many of you guys may know, we've been calling this ever since the trade war started, that America is gonna bend under the economic pressure because the U.S. economy cannot afford to continue this trade war. So if you guys can help us out, take a second, hit that like and subscribe button down below. It truly does help us out with the algorithm. Look, let's look at the details of what exactly is happening to the American economy. Not long ago, anyone could look at economic data and see consistent growth. Then it started to deteriorate rapidly. We've been covering how import data collapsed back in April 2025, and ever since then, trade activity in America has only gone down. Port activity measures, manufacturing data, and consumer confidence indicators have gone negative in recent months. Data on retail sales and business investment confidence have been cut drastically. Even official employment growth reports are showing massive slowdowns. American economic indicators have shown hundreds of negative data points once used by investors and analysts. The declining numbers have come as the U.S. economy has stumbled under the weight of self-imposed tariffs, a crumbling trade relationship with China, and other troubles. Now, I want to show you guys some of the data that proves the U.S. economy is struggling. Here, we have national import figures. And you can see, over the last few months, the data has been down, down, down. The largest decline in American history. Here's another example. The number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits. This data has been going up as businesses struggle with higher costs. If unemployment is going up, you can tell the economy is not doing well because America cannot have unemployment numbers rise while claiming the trade war is winning. Official GDP claims have been trying to stay positive. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we got Q1 GDP figures, and surprise, surprise, the American economy actually contracted by 0.3%, missing all expectations. But to me, this doesn't seem like an economy that's winning if imports are collapsing by record amounts. I don't know a single leader in the world who would call an economy strong when trade is collapsing at historic rates. Even here in America, prominent economists are saying the administration may be wrong about the trade war's impact. Here's what Goldman Sachs economists said publicly. They had to reduce the U.S. recession probability from 45% to 35% after the temporary China trade deal, but that still means more than 1 in 3 chance of economic collapse. These are prominent economists from major Wall Street firms who have advised top officials before. They said that economic growth is weaker in sectors hit by tariffs and stronger only in protected domestic industries. They say this can be summarized into 3 phrases. Protected industries are artificially propped up, export industries are getting crushed, and consumer-facing businesses have nothing to gain. Very sobering comments that we rarely hear in public discourse because analysts have been pushing positive narratives, avoiding using words like recession because officials want a more optimistic story. They say that higher prices are hitting American families because tariffs act like a regressive tax. Consumers are holding back spending. They estimate that millions of Americans have been priced out of goods they used to buy regularly because of tariff-induced price increases. They also said that real economic growth is being overstated because the administration isn't accounting for the full impact of price increases on actual purchasing power. Ever since this trade war started, the U.S. economy has gotten so bad that even supporters are starting to question the strategy. America just cannot survive without global trade partnerships. Now here we've got details about how the trade situation is evolving and the real impact on American businesses. The data shows clear evidence that the trade war strategy needs serious reconsideration. We've got massive import declines, GDP contraction, and rising unemployment claims. The data shows American families are bearing the cost of tariffs. Economic data shows that families are paying $2,237 more per year when trade wars escalate. Consumer goods prices are rising across multiple categories. Clothes are expected to rise by 14%. Computers and electronics by 14%, leather products like shoes and handbags by 15%. The average effective tariff rate now stands at 17.8%. That is the highest since 1934. The situation is playing out like trade wars have historically unfolded. When countries impose massive tariffs, what happens first is economic disruption that hurts the country imposing them as much as their targets. And that's exactly what is happening to America. Then, after a few months of economic pain, officials start looking for ways to reverse course. But we often double down and make problems worse. Economic damage gets locked in for years. By the time leaders realize the strategy isn't working, significant harm has already been done. Current data shows the economic pain is getting worse, not better. Now that we have clear evidence of contraction, the administration is sticking to the same playbook. We said tariffs would bring prosperity, but economic data shows the opposite. The data is demanding that top policymakers address reality directly. Economists and businesses are not buying into this positive spin anymore. Now let me explain what's happening with standard economic indicators. First, GDP is contracting. The numbers show clear economic decline. Officials want to frame this as temporary, but the data suggests longer-term problems. Economic contractions that continue for multiple quarters often signal deeper structural problems, not just temporary adjustments. Second, businesses want policy clarity. You start with uncertainty and work through various stages of economic adaptation, and at every step, new economic data demands policy adjustments. Economists have learned from studying trade wars how they impact global supply chains, and America is experiencing this firsthand. We're seeing economic disruption as businesses try to navigate the new trade environment. Other countries are being forced to choose sides in this trade conflict, affecting global economic relationships that took decades to build. American businesses are restructuring operations to avoid economic disruption, which creates inefficiencies and, higher costs. U.S. companies are struggling to maintain competitiveness while dealing with higher input costs from tariffs. Chinese exporters are stepping up efforts to avoid U.S. tariffs by shipping goods via third countries, which affects market access and trade relationships. The temporary trade deal announced in Geneva on May the 12th might look like good news on the surface, but it's really just kicking the can down the road. While U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods dropped from 145% to 30%, and Chinese tariffs on American products fell from 125% to 10%, these are only 90-day measures. The fundamental problems remain unchanged. Both sides are using this time to prepare for the next round of economic warfare. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said neither side wants a decoupling, but the damage is already done. Stock markets rallied after the announcement, but analysts warn this is just temporary relief. The 90-day period may not be sufficient for the two sides to reach a detailed agreement. As one expert put it, we expect the market to get back onto a risk-on sentiment in the near term, but pressure remains high. Chinese state media claimed Beijing has held firm to its principles while opening a path to more cooperation, but the reality is both economies are suffering. China's consumer price index declined 0.1% in April for the third consecutive month, showing their economy is also struggling. The reality is that trade wars typically hurt all participants, and the U.S. economy is proving this point. What we're seeing now is an economic strategy backfiring on the very people it was supposed to help: American workers and American families. The data shows this trade war is extracting a heavy price from the American economy. The question isn't whether policy will change, it's how much economic damage will accumulate before leaders acknowledge what the data is already telling us. Imports exploded by 41.3% in quarter one as companies rushed to stockpile goods ahead of tariffs, taking more than 5 percentage points off GDP growth. This was the biggest import surge outside the COVID pandemic since 1974. Private hiring collapsed to just 62,000 jobs in April, far below the 134,000 economists predicted. Professional forecasters are slashing growth projections to just 1.9% for 2025, down from 2.8% in 2024. Unemployment is expected to climb to 4.6% by mid-2026 as businesses delay investment decisions due to trade policy uncertainty. The U.S. economy deserves better than policies that ignore economic reality. Americans deserve leaders who will admit when strategies are not working and adjust course before even more damage is done. But unfortunately for American workers and families, the current path leads to more economic pain, higher prices, and reduced global competitiveness. The trade war that was supposed to make America great again is instead making the American economy crash, and the data proves it. Thank you for watching.